Last week, I laid out my plan for the largest, most complicated minigame I've made to date. An entire functioning roguelike in Minecraft. Last time I showed my systems for random loot chests, a working item shop, and a way to do random dungeon generation in Minecraft. And this episode, I'll show you all the advancements I've made since. Let's begin. Now last week I showed my plan for how I can do random generation in Minecraft. Basically I'm going to have a grid full of rooms and I have different walls in between, and when I hit this button I can randomize the walls being up or down to make a general random layout. And some of you in the comments rightfully pointed out this will have some innate issues. Let's say that this wood represents where the player enters the dungeon, and if each one of these walls has a 50-50 chance of either being up or down, it does mean that the player could get unlucky and all 4 walls in the starting room are closed from the get-go, essentially making the floor unplayable. Now I have done a slight fix to this by simply making that one of the doors is always open. Another thing I completely failed to mention last time is while my dungeon plans on having multiple massive floors connected to one another, I never explained how the player will actually navigate from dungeon floor to dungeon floor. You see, traditionally in roguelikes and games like The Binding of Isaac, the player will start in a room and they'll have to navigate room to room through the dungeon and eventually find the exit, represented by this wood over here. However, because our dungeon is randomly generated in the layout, it's entirely possible that when the rooms go up and down, it can generate in such a manner that it's completely impossible to reach the exit. And of course, people in the comments rightfully pointed this out. However, what I didn't explain is I never planned on putting a random exit in the first place. My plan the whole time was to actually have multiple exits stacked on top of each other, and we basically go down to a dungeon, we navigate to the floor, and then we return to this central room to which there is a central elevator which takes us to each floor. And that's how I was going to get around the random generation issue, is simply by having the player always return to where they started. I found this design online by a Dr. Plasma, which is a nice slimestone elevator. Basically, the player can stand on this and we can hit a button to lower it, and then we can use this as a descending mechanism to go from floor to floor. And the best part about it is once you're done with the run, it can actually return upwards as well by hitting this button. We can go all the way back up. And while I love this elevator idea, it actually had a bit of an issue. You see, what's stopping the player from just immediately going down to the bottom layer and skipping all the previous floors and just getting the best loot at the bottom? How can I prevent this? I want the game to actually have some progression to it. Well, I had an idea. Let's make it so the elevator has a cost to use. Now you'll see that the elevator has a redstone lamp, a barrel, and a note block. Currently, if I try to use the note block and descend the elevator, nothing is going to work, because the elevator actually requires a bit of diamonds. So if I put in 3 diamonds, you'll see that the light turns on. Now when I hit the note block, the elevator will actually work. So the basic idea is you'll go down to each floor, you'll have to explore, gather loot, and then you can use that loot to go lower into the dungeon to get better loot, risk versus reward. Or you can choose to savor what you have and actually return to the surface by pressing this button back here. So you actually have a bit of choice as well. Now obviously, because in our dungeon we plan on using the combat system of trial chambers, damn silverfish, these actually have a bit of an issue I've had to consider. And that is when you actually kill the mobs, they actually have their own loot pool. And how can I factor this into the actual game? Well, looking at the loot pool, the majority of the loot is actually just food items, which predominantly will be used for healing for players throughout the dungeon. But they also have trial keys, which I would otherwise have no use for. And then I had a brilliant idea. These trial keys, why don't I make these the things you have to use the elevator? Not only does it give them a use, it kind of thematically works with them being keys. This also has another advantage with ominous trial keys. Usually these will only spawn trial keys, but if you have a bottle of bad omen on you and you drink these, it makes trial spawners Ominous, where you get a harder mode and a harder challenge, but in exchange, they have a chance to spawn ominous keys. What we can then use is, while trial keys only access the second level, you can then use ominous keys to go even further, meaning that the third and final floor is locked behind what is ostensibly a hard mode. And of course, ominous bottles would be loot you can find in the dungeon itself. I thought for an entrance it'd be fun if it's just like an inconspicuous ancient looking ruin on the surface of a nice grass area. You walk up and then you have the button, start your run and descend. So you hit the button, the elevator lowers down, and then you go into the first floor. Now each one of these floors I want to have a different theme. You know, keep it interesting. So the first floor, I've decided to go for like a classic RPG dungeon look, where the rooms are kind of overgrown and mossy, and then we can decorate each room with various things. And the next level, I've decided to instead theme around the back rooms. I thought that might be interesting. I don't exactly know what I can do with it yet, but I thought, hey, if we have all these rooms, why not go for a backrooms theme? And then we descend to the final layer of the dungeon, which is going to be themed around like brimstone, fire, and hell. And while this plan was great, it kinda had a flaw which was really annoying me. You see, previously I mentioned that I wanted meta progression in the way of having droppers all the way up to the surface, so that any items you collect, you can then take it back to the surface, but you would be limited to only 9 slots per run. Now, obviously, if you can just return to the surface at any time with your full inventory, this completely negates the need to save certain items and risk others. It just takes it out of the game because you can just take whatever you want with your full inventory back up. How do we get around this? Question for the audience. How can you detect a player's inventory in Minecraft on whether or not it is full or empty? How can you ensure that a player actually empties their inventory at the end of every run? The answer is you can't. The only way to ensure that a player's inventory is empty is to murder them. And I've got to be honest, I hated the idea of forcing the players to off themselves when they've just conquered this giant dungeon just for the sake of ensuring that their inventory was empty. So I had to go for the other option, which I'm not fully happy with, but it's better. And that is, at the end of the dungeon, we have a keep safe chest for next time, limited to the 9 slots we wanted, and then we just have a chest next to it, and we just kindly ask them on an honor system to please empty their inventory and not screw over the game. But at the same time, it's not that bad asking players to just abide by a certain honor rule. I mean, realistically, what's stopping the players from going down with a pickaxe and just mining through the walls and breaking the redstone? Nothing other than it ruins the fun. I mean, this is true for all video games. Nothing's stopping you from playing a video game and just downloading a 100% save file on the internet, or playing a game of chess in real life and just getting up and punching your opponent. You just don't do this because it's against the rules of the game. It's not fun. Well, maybe the chess thing, but maybe that's just me. So let's say I've just finished a dungeon run and now I want to go all the way back up to the surface. Now when I hit return to surface, I don't immediately go there, but instead go to the starting and finishing room where I can actually do a bit of inventory management. See, we now have this brand new room back here. And now, at the other side of the room, we have this green grid, where we have the dropper, where we can save items we want to keep for the next run, or in the future, for example, these items. And anything left remaining in my inventory, I have to go to this barrel, and I have to empty my inventory into here. And now when my inventory is empty, I can actually return to the elevator, and return to the surface for proper, where I can then go about my business of, whatever. But likewise, now when we actually start a new run, we don't immediately enter the dungeon either, where once we're in, we can go back to this dropper and collect any items we want to take into the dungeon with us. So for example, maybe I only want to take the sword. And the advantage of this grid is we can actually sell or find other droppers which we can place down to expand our potential storage, so we actually have a bit of meta progression in these items as well. The other reason we return to this starting room before each run is I've added classes to the game, which are displayed on these little murals back here. Now, I've designed 6 classes in total, and you'll notice that we can't enter any of them because they're all locked, apart from one, which is our starting base class, the Yeoman. What the Yeoman starts you with is a wooden sword, some basic leather armor, and a few golden carrots to start you off with. It's a bit of a basic everyman class. But what about the other classes? You see, I've actually given them some really interesting items which should lead to different playstyles. But here's the thing, they're all locked. So I've actually added different conditions to unlock the different classes. So for example, the next basic one is the soldier, where you start with an iron helmet, a shield, and an axe, where the unlock condition is to reach Gehenna. Gehenna is the name of the 3rd level, the one with all like the blood and viscera down here. This one will unlock when you reach here for the very first time. Well, over here on the right side, we have a class called the Scribe, which starts with a copper sword, some chicken, and an item I will explain in a bit. The unlock condition for the Scribe is not to reach or do a certain thing, but rather an item unlock, the Scribe's Key. And then probably one of the more interesting classes is the Tarnished, which starts with nothing except a bad omen bottle, which basically activates hard mode, with no items. The unlock condition for this is to beat the dungeon in its entirety. This sort of acts as a hard new game plus for players to return with, which would be really interesting to see people do runs with. Our final class is the Scholar, and this is probably one of the more weird ones. Not only does he start with a turtle helmet, an ender pearl, and a totem of undying, he doesn't start with any weapons, but he does start with a reusable item called Crack Rock. What the Crack Rock can be used for is you can basically explore an entire dungeon, and then you can use the Crack Rock at the starting area to re-roll the dungeon walls to potentially explore new areas, or re-navigate environmental dangers. One thing I've also done is over on floor 2, the backrooms themed floor, I have added the shop. So you'll actually have to navigate all the way down to floor 2 if you want to buy things from the shop. And the final thing I've added to the dungeon this week is a way for players to actually win. I have a plan for it. You see, down here on the final floor of the dungeon, Gehenna, players will always have access to this giant locked off gold door. The general idea is throughout the dungeon, maybe the shops or loot chests, players will finally have to put together 2 random key pieces, key piece 1 and key piece 2. Once they get these 2 key pieces, they can place this in this barrel 1 and 2, and then it will unlock this big gold door, to which on the other side, eventually, I'm going to build the final boss battle of the dungeon. Ooh la la. And in fact, I've just thought about this right now. Because we have different classes, what we might be able to do to encourage replayability further is maybe we have like a light at the top of each class, and this only turns on if you've managed to beat the final boss with that class. So maybe the ultimate game progression is maybe trying to beat the game with each one of the classes. And for a final thing this week, I would like to announce I finally have decided on a game name for my roguelike. Because the game is now so focused around this central elevator and descending further and further, each elevator you want to get loot, to descend, to go down, to descend, I thought, what better name than simply calling it Descendant? And if you want a lore reason, well, maybe each time you die in the dungeon, you play as that previous hero's descendant. So, tune in next week where I might be able to have a first playable version, a real prototype.